So the Lewis Goodall interview with Hasan Piker was batshit crazy. It was an hour-long discussion on LBC where Goodall smashed out pro-Israel tropes like there was no tomorrow. Now, before we even take a look at the clips, there's already controversy, and that is LBC editing the segment and then lying about it. So responding to a commenter claiming that the interview was edited, Lewis Goodall said, "We did not edit the conversation. The only edit which took place was to hide the fact that at one point the Zoom cut out." But if you go on the LBC channel, if you go on the interview, it's full of people pointing out that there are cuts. When I watched it, I could tell there were obviously cuts, but we have proof.
For Israel has not been achieved yet, right? But this would be not dissimilar to, I guess, a communist or a socialist in Nazi Germany before the final solution, pointing to the Armenian genocide.
Given the Israel, Hasan, given the Israelis, given the military capabilities.
Oh, they cut my argument there. I literally, wait, or did they fucking just hit the mute? That's crazy. I said, would you disagree if like a communist or a socialist during Nazi occupation pointed to what Hitler was doing to the Jews and to the socialists, and then said this is identical to the Armenian genocide that preceded it? Would you have said, well, you're actually hurting the feelings of you're besmirching the good reputation of the Nazis by making a comparison? These are just simply concentration camps. These are, dangerous radical elements in society that must be cordoned off.
And another.
To compare it to the Holocaust.
The disagreement that we have is not that.
My suggestion to you would be that.
Wait, why is he cutting me? What the fuck? Oh, come on, LBC. You cut all the crosstalk. You muted me the entire time. That's crazy.
Compare it to the Holocaust.
The disagreement that we have is not that.
My suggestion to you would be that it is crass and offensive.
Bro, they didn't even try to make the cut seem normal. They hit the hard cut again. Holy moly, that's a lot.
And then Hasan Piker, and it's really obvious for you to see when you watch it back, but Hasan Piker explains that LBC lowered his mic at points.
Oh, well, we wanted to make sure that we made this editorial decision for brevity, for clarity, but in this circumstance, it's quite deliberate. You are literally lowering my volume because you don't want your audience to hear my perspective, which, again, is the exact opposite of the whole purpose of having me on the broadcast. Did you have me on your broadcast so you could try and bully me into submission? Or did you have me on the broadcast to have a good faith, honest discussion about disagreements that we might have? I've been very courteous throughout this entire process. I don't imply in any way, shape, or form that Lewis Goodall is a stooge for Israel or defending Israel and Israeli interests or anything like that. I'm just saying, look, we might have some disagreements. It's a good faith, honest, liberal style conversation.
But let's get into the actual interview. So first up, Goodall is complaining that Hasan Piker has made comparisons of the current genocide in Gaza with the Holocaust.
But do you think it might ever be better sometimes just to never compare any Jews to Nazis? It might just be wise to do that.
No, I don't. I'm not so precious about that comparison. And I've actually had.
But maybe that's easy for you to say
debates.
as a non-Jewish person.
Oh, for sure. But I'm,
I mean, you can call them lots of things, Hasan. I'm just sort of trying to be as sort of generous as possible.
Well,
but you could. There are so many things you could call those settlers. I'm not defending those settlers for a moment. I think a lot of them are committing heinous acts. I think a lot of the people in the far right of the Netanyahu government are absolutely appalling. I would say that completely explicitly. But you know what? You could probably say all that, and you could probably make a stronger case and not undermine yourself by comparing them to Nazis, because Nazis literally tried to exterminate who they are as Jews.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. The comparison,
so why'd you do it?
In my opinion, the comparison, in my opinion, is not only graphic, but it's apt. Because Nazism is a fascist ideology. It's a dangerous fascist
call them
ideology
fascists then.
Led to,
call them fascists. You don't need to call them Nazis or neo-Nazis.
Well, but the reason why I specifically deploy the term Nazi, is because, well, two reasons. Number one, the goals of ethnic cleansing are identical, and especially considering that a genocide has unfolded at this point, a modern day genocide with different tools. It's not the same exact type of genocide as the Holocaust, of course, not the concentration camps, and yet it's an open air prison that has been bombarded with almost 10 atom bombs worth of explosive ordnance that my government, and as a matter of fact, your government has aided and abetted in the process of. And from that perspective, the reason why I say I'm not so precious about this, while always maintaining the position that anti-Semitism is completely unacceptable, I always say I'm not precious about this because at the end of the day, it's a genocide. At the end of the day, this is an apartheid state. And Zionism as an ideology is a racist ideology, and many Jewish thinkers are now also coming to terms with that, even if they had self-identified as Zionists their entire lives.
Now, people like Lewis, there are many people in the media who get offended when you make Nazi Holocaust comparisons, and their argument is, well, October 7th was an event where Jews were the primary victim. And then, obviously, the Nazi Holocaust, Jews were the primary victim. And then they believe that even though Israel, or some believe, in some corners of the media believe that Israel may have acted disproportionately, to act like this genocide is any way like the Nazi Holocaust is disgusting. Because what you're saying is Jews were a victim of a Holocaust, of a genocide, and now they're perpetrators of a genocide. And the thing is, what is worse than words and arguments? It's atrocities. And what you have is people, pro-Israel, people Zionists, or people in the media like Lewis Goodall, are offended by words and arguments, seemingly more than crimes being committed, as in innocent children being murdered by Israel. The Nazi Holocaust is the perfect comparison, because what was the phrase we heard after the Holocaust? Never again. The problem, though, is never again has become empty words. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything, because we are doing it again. There's another genocide happening. Now, the point of never again was not to just have a slogan or just have words. It was a call to action to say we cannot allow any kind of genocide to ever happen again. And because it's happening again, I think that the Holocaust is a perfect example. I mean, you literally have genocidal rhetoric coming from Israeli ministers. You can quite literally pull a quote from an Israeli minister and pull a quote from Nazi Germany, replace the word Jew, and it is literally exactly the same. Replace the word Palestinian with Jew, and it's no different. But we're not allowed to make that comparison because it might be offensive. I mean, there are so many newspaper headlines, whether it's the Daily Mail, the Express, they'll say some really incendiary things about immigrants and recently about Afghanis and Somalis, right? Again, you can copy and paste a modern day headline about Muslims and replace the word Jew, and you'd find it's like almost exactly like the newspaper headlines in 1940s Germany. So it would be good to say, do you know what? I can see the parallels here between Nazi Germany and what we're seeing from the papers today. Now, does that mean that there's going to be another Holocaust and there's going to be gas chambers again? No, but it's really good to look at things in a historical context and make sure that you point out the red flags to make sure we don't go down that road. And guess what? A lot of liberals would do that. A lot of liberals be like, yeah, I look at the papers today and sometimes they seem similar to like Nazi Germany. But when it comes to Israel, you're not allowed to make that comparison, even though it is categorically true. Now, another part is where Lewis pretty much treats Israeli life as more important than Palestinian life.
I oppose
that. I think killing civilians under any circumstances is wrong, whether it's Israelis or Hamas doing it.
The reason why I say Israel's 1,000 times worse than Hamas.
No, I think the principle is the same. I think the principle is the same. I don't think I'm not a utilitarian, clearly, in the same way that you are, Hasan. I don't think that just because you kill
do you disagree that Israel has killed 1,000 times more civilians than Hamas has?
I don't know what the statistics are, but I would accept completely that Israel has killed lots of civilians, and it's absolutely heinous. Unlike you, I would draw a moral equivalence between those acts. But you seem to be willing to more because you're attached to a sort of anti-colonial ideology.
I mean, what was at the end there? He's kind of mocking him for having an anti-colonialist ideology. What, are you saying colonialism is a good thing? You know, an ideology which is stolen land, which has murdered millions of innocent people? Oh, it's just your anti-colonialist ideology. That's crazy. Now, Lewis Goodall was saying, well, I draw a moral equivalence between murdering people on October 7th and murdering anyone before or after October 7th, which is absolutely insane, right? Now, this wouldn't, stack up in our courts in this country. If someone is charged with 5 murders, they are more than likely going to face a harsher punishment than someone who commits one murder. Because 5 murders is worse than 1 murder. Yet, following Lewis's logic, there is no difference. Oh, it's morally exactly the same. But no, one person's taken 5 lives. So you could say maybe they should face 5 times as long in prison, for example. Essentially, Lewis is basically saying there is no difference between killing one person and 100,000 people. Because killing's all bad. Yeah, killing's all bad, but I think killing more than one person, and in Israel's case, potentially up to 100,000 people since October 7th, is a far greater crime than the hundreds that Hamas killed on October 7th. It doesn't mean that it's okay what Hamas did, but it's very obvious which one is worse. So Hasan Piker is just objectively correct here. No, and this is why Lewis is valuing Israeli life over Palestinian lives. Because he's basically saying one Israeli life is worth more than 1,000 Palestine lives. And lots of people seem to think that Lewis is one of the good legacy media journalists. I think this interview with Hasan Piker proves that he's utter trash, and in my opinion, whether he realizes it or not, is being racist against Palestinians. He then claims that Palestinians push gay people off buildings.
Look, I get everything you're saying, Hasan, but when you say that Hamas is 1,000 times better than Israel, I mean, let's leave aside the fact that Israel, whatever we think about it, is a democratic state, admittedly one that's been going down a more authoritarian direction. You say you'd vote for...
It's democratically in favor of genocide and apartheid. So
it's also got Arab Israelis and Palestinian Israelis who live there as citizens with others, which is not the same as apartheid in South Africa.
They're considered second-class citizens as dictated by the Israeli constitution.
But the point is...
There are varying degrees of discrimination in Israeli society.
But I tell you where there's a lot of discrimination in Hamas-run Gaza. I mean, how would you feel about being a gay man, for example, living under Hamas, or a woman, for example? And you say you would vote for them 1,000 times over. You can't vote for them.
I know gay Palestinians, and they would say the exact same thing that I'm about to tell you. The biggest threat to their existence is the Israeli occupation. They might have disagreements with Hamas. They might not
they'll be pushed off a bridge.
Elements. No, that's racialized.
It's not racialized. It literally happens. LGBT Hasan, LGBT groups around the world have condemned her.
That's not true. That's simply not true.
So you think that is? It is literally
I will have to push back on this. What you're saying is actually not true, and also a little bit messed up to say, because these groups are very different from one another. I am not an Islamist personally, obviously. I am not. I'm not someone who's ever going to be in favor of religious fundamentalism. But Hamas does not represent religious fundamentalist governance. It represents.
You can get up to 10 years in prison for being gay. You can get up to 10 years in prison for being gay down the barrel of a Hamas gun. And that wouldn't happen to you in Tel Aviv. Whatever we think about Israel, that wouldn't happen to you in Tel Aviv.
It doesn't matter, because the gay people are being killed by Israeli bombs.
So it was ISIS who did that. But I guess for Goodall, it's just all Muslims, isn't it? So they just do the same thing. So this whole pushing gay people off buildings, it happened years ago, again, under ISIS. There's no examples of this happening in Palestine. But do you know who's done that recently? The IDF.
لا يا الله تحمي شبابنا يا الله ويرحم شهدائنا الخنزير.
Now, we've heard this argument before, right? From a lot of right-wingers. They'll see pictures of people at pro-Palestine protests, signs that say queers for Palestine or queers against genocide. And they're like, well, wouldn't you not be accepted in Gaza and Palestine for being gay? First of all, it's a massive assumption in how conservative their politics is in Palestine. But it's also potentially true. Like, maybe it's a very conservative place, right? But that doesn't change the fact that you should be against a genocide. Like, give me the reddest state in America. Find me the most homophobic, conservative, reactionary state in America, right? I still don't think they should be bombed to smithereens. If there was a genocide in a state in America, right, regardless of the average person's view, I'd be like, this is wrong. Okay? Like, if the state was like polled that 90% of people in a particular state hated gay people and opposed gay marriage, right? If I was a gay person, I'd still be like, yeah, I don't think they should all be murdered though. So it's a terrible gotcha. Lewis then continues with some shameful Zionist propaganda where he treats October 7th as some kind of unique act of senseless violence, stripping it of all context.
However disproportionate we might think the Israeli government has been in the reaction to October the 7th, and I would agree with you that it has been disproportionate and in many cases appalling. October the 7th did happen. 1,300 Jews were killed in the most horrendous, heinous way that we might imagine. It was a pogrom. There is a major security problem for the state of Israel with Hamas and with Hezbollah. They do have to protect their own citizens and their own people.
Now, I thought that was a really shameful bit of propaganda. So, of course, yes, once again, we all say it, like, the innocent people killed on October 7th is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. But the way he describes it, he really strips it of all context because he says it was a pogrom and 1,300 Jews were killed. It was not a pogrom, right? A pogrom is when you go out and deliberately just try and kill Jews because, or any particular people, because of your racist ideology, right? I'm not saying that those that participated in October 7th weren't anti-Semites. I'm sure there were plenty of them. I'm sure there were some of them part that were like, I just want to kill Jews. But the broader context here is 85 years of occupation. It's absolutely wild to say, oh no, it was a specific pogrom because basically Palestinians and Hamas just hate Jews and that's why it happened. And also, 1,300 Jews, that's also a strange way of describing the event. 1,300 is the number that a lot of mainstream media outlets push out. I think it was closer to like 700. But within those 700 were IDF soldiers, not innocent civilians. Also, why are you just saying Jews? I find that absolutely strange. I mean, let's say the terrorist attack of 7/7 in our own country. And imagine if the mainstream media said, X amount of white people were killed. No one would describe it as that. I mean, Lewis Goodall wouldn't describe it as that. He would describe it as X amount of Brits were killed or just X amount of people were killed. But that's what you hear. But for some reason, when describing October 7th, you don't hear X amount of Israelis were killed. You hear X amount of Jews were killed. And it's a deliberate thing to try and make it about racism and a religious war and nothing to do with, imperialism and colonialism and geopolitics. So it's always Jews, not Israelis. Finally, no one ever mentions this, the Hannibal Directive, where the Hannibal Directive is an order from Israel and the IDF to kill their own if there's fear of a soldier being captured. And that happened on October 7th. Israelis killed their own, but no one says that. The next bit is genuinely disgusting.
Throughout this entire history of Israel and Palestine, this conflict gets reduced to an ethnic conflict or a religious conflict. It's not true. It's simply settler colonial expansion. And of course, there's going to be militant opposition towards that. And that militant opposition is, of course, going to evolve over time. So the idea...
But we are where we are, aren't we?
How can...
We're not in 1948. And so therefore, Israel has got to find a way to live alongside the Palestinian people. You and I, I'm sure, would both agree to say that their actions have not exactly contributed to that principle or idea in recent years. But they do have to deal with Hamas.
Oh, we are where we are. It's not 1948. Oh, so the decades-long occupation, the killing of children for throwing stones. Oh, that doesn't matter. That was in the past. No, none of the things mattered that led up to October 7th. All that matters is October 7th. I think that's a genuinely awful thing to say. And then he says, Israel has not acted favorably in recent years. He's acting as if Zionism isn't an ideology that wants to wipe out Palestinians and others. It's not just recent years. It's from its inception. The Nakba began on violence because it's a settler colonial project. Zionism is a colonial project, right? Colonialism doesn't just expand to a certain point and then go, I'm done now. That's it. The thing that stops colonialism is pushback and resistance. Like the British Empire, if we could have taken over every single country on Earth, we would have done that. So the same with the Greater Israel Project. They're not going to stop expanding until they reach the natural conclusion of colonialism, which is to try and take over every country on earth. And that was what Israel was from the very beginning. So to say, well, Israel's overstepped the mark, they've been bad in recent years, fundamentally misunderstands and is completely ahistorical about the function of Israel. Now, this next bit, Piker absolutely clears Goodall.
Is it true that you said that you considered Hamas to be 1,000 times better than Israel and you'd vote for Hamas over Israel every single time? Is that true and you stand by it?
Yeah, I do.
That's despite the fact that Hamas was responsible for October the 7th and a pogrom against Jewish people. You said you'd vote for them 1,000 times over the democratic state of Israel.
It wasn't a pogrom against Jewish people. Were there atrocities and war crimes that took place?
You don't think that there was any anti-Semitism involved in
Absolutely.
This is where you go wrong, Hasan. You find yourself basically in a position defending
don't tell me I'm wrong.
elements
tell
of
me
this.
Why I'm wrong.
I'm telling you why you're wrong, because you're honestly saying you saw Jewish people, overwhelmingly Jewish people killed that day. It was a pogrom. It was the biggest pogrom of Jews that we've seen, against Jews that we've seen since the end of the Second World War. Why do you find yourself in a position where you're like, okay, I'm actually going to defend that principle, I'm going to defend the argument about that? Why? You just undermine yourself.
Great question. I actually gave an interview to the Times UK on this as well, and I'll explain exactly why.
Jeez.
So October 7 was traumatic. There were heinous acts of violence that took place. No doubt about it. I would never agree. I would never disagree with that assessment. What I will disagree with, however, is the intentionality. The idea that October 7 was done specifically to kill as many Jewish people as possible, I think is incorrect. I think the ultimate goal of the Palestinian resistance, whether we agree with their methods or tactics or not, and I certainly have my disagreements, the ultimate goal of the Palestinian resistance wasn't just Hamas.
They killed 1,300 people. And rape people.
Yeah, of course.
Killed innocent young people at music festivals.
But the ultimate goal is to make the occupation as costly as possible, because the extended 80-year, or at the time 75-year occupation had done October 7's.
So the ends justify the means, do they? The ends justify the means. If I can compare it to something in the UK, Hasan.
The reason why I don't believe that the Israeli ends justify the means, and that's precisely the reason why I'm saying.
So why do you then say that Hamas is 1,000 times better than Israel?
Because Israel has done an October 7 1,000 times over to the Palestinian population.
Piker is objectively correct on Hamas. He's not excusing their crimes, he's contextualizing them. Saying Israel's worse than Hamas is not even controversial. Only if you think Israeli blood is more important than Palestinian blood, you would. Because if you find the crimes of October 7th heinous, and let's even take the mainstream figure of 1,300 people were killed, right? Israel has killed 10 times more. They've killed 100 times more. And if you don't think that's worse than Hamas, you seriously have something wrong with you. So Hasan Piker's basically saying from a harm reduction standpoint, well, technically Hamas is not as bad. He's not saying they're not bad. And I just think that if you create an equivalence between October 7th and what Israel's done before or after October 7th, that you're basically saying, as I said earlier, that Israeli blood is more important than Palestinian blood. He then says, oh, well, Israel's a democratic state. No, it's not a democratic state. It's an apartheid state. I mean, there's occupied territories, right, in which Israelis can walk down in one road and Palestinians are not allowed to walk down the same road. You think that's democratic? This is why Goodall and the mainstream media are insanely biased toward Israel. Now, some corners of the media can criticize the government, as Lewis Goodall does. They'll call out war crimes from this government. But that's the extent they will go. They'll often attack the Netanyahu government rather than Israel as a state itself, because they fundamentally believe that Israel in its current form of apartheid is acceptable. They cannot see in any way why or how Hamas exists, and they are completely fine with the occupation and the Nakba. And if they did some kind of digging, a quick Google search would find that Netanyahu quite literally bolstered Hamas. Hamas would not exist without Netanyahu, but Hamas wouldn't exist without Israel, because Hamas doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's been multiple military resistance over the years from Palestinians towards Israel, and this is just the latest iteration of it. And guess what? It's not going to stop. The violence will not stop until Israel I mean, I don't think you can just say Israel stops what they're doing. Fundamentally, Israel in its current form cannot exist. No states have a right to exist. Israel doesn't have as a right to exist. There needs to be, and I don't believe in a two-state solution anymore. It's because, yes, Palestine might get a state. Yes, they may have more legal protections, but do you think that's going to stop Israel? I mean, they've just been attacking Iran and Lebanon, who are also states. Iran is thousands of years old and hasn't stopped Israel. So they're still going to continue to attack Palestine, whether they have a state or not. So there needs to be a one state in which Jewish people, Arabs, Palestinians, whoever, live together in a secular state. But ultimately, it's not down to us. It's down to the people who it affects. That's the reality of it. And people like Lewis Goodall pat themselves on the back and say, well, I call it war crimes. I think Israel's gone too far. Give me an applause. I'm sorry, it's not good enough. The entire Zionist regime is the problem. But please go check out the full interview. Goodall completely embarrasses himself. And for those who think he's one of the good ones for legacy media, no, he isn't.